Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, to this roundtable discussion on lessons from Latin America in terms of smallholder resilience to climate change. And shortly we'll hear from our panelists going forward on some of the interventions, some of the activities going on, which I'm really excited about. My name is Mark Chandler. I'm a Director of Environmental Initiatives at Heifer in a global capacity, supporting our programs globally. And I'm delighted to be joined today by two colleagues, Luisa Tabin from Heifer Guatemala and Ernesto Méndez from University of Vermont. And first, I'd like to ask them to give a brief introduction to themselves.
Luisa.
Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Luisa. I currently work in Heifer Guatemala, and I'm the project manager for one of the Heifer projects called Building Climate Resilience through value chains for the mobilization of the adaptation funding. Thank you for being here, and I am really excited to tell you about what we are doing in Guatemala and Honduras. Thank you.
Good morning. Buenos dias. First of all, thank you, Mark, and the Heifer team for inviting me to this talk. I'm Ernesto Méndez. Like Mark said, I'm a professor of agroecology at the University of Vermont in the United States. And I also co-direct here a new institute for agroecology that was established a little over a year ago. And I have been working in agroforestry, mostly in the tropics, for almost 30 years now. So it is really great to come back to have this conversation, and all this work has been with smallholder farmers. So thanks again, and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. For me, one of the reasons I'm really excited about this roundtable here is that it's really thinking about the importance of smallholders and presenting a couple really interesting kinds of projects that I think we can learn a lot from. We know that smallholders is roughly somewhere between 500 and 600 million smallholder farmers globally. We know of their importance in providing food to roughly half of the peoples in the region where they live. And we also know that because of their vulnerability to climate change and their lack of access to resources, that they're highly impoverished. And so often the narratives around them are rather, I'll call them negative narratives about needing support and being vulnerable and so on. And what excites me about these specific projects is that it sort of flips that narrative and looks instead at positive stories about working together with them to be able to create resilient communities and learning from them in that way. So I'm really excited about listening to both Luisa and Ernesto in these presentations going forward, so rethinking about how we think about smallholder farmers in a positive way in this way. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from both of our panelists here. Ernesto, over to you. Actually, I have one housekeeping piece, which is that we would love to hear some questions from you. So please put questions in the chat that we will collect, and we'll have time at the end to be able to ask these questions of our panelists. Ernesto?
Thank you, Mark. Yes, and thank you, Amy. And so I wanted to bring, as I said, I'm a professor of agroecology, and that is the field that I have used, even though my work has been with agroforestry systems. I'm going to say, like, all of my work in the tropics is related in one way or another to agroforestry systems. Next slide, please, Amy. And I'll start by just introducing the Institute for Agroecology, which is a new university-wide institute with a very large aim of transforming our food systems to ones that are ecologically sound and socially just. You can read more about us on the website that is there on the slide. Next, please, Amy. And the way that we go about using agroecology in all the work that we do is with this transformative approach, which really tries to understand both the multiple dimensions, but also the complex interactions that exist in our food system from farm to table. And also all those bigger, wider externalities and political economic factors. We do that by using different and diverse knowledge systems, starting with science, but also indigenous knowledge, and bringing those to pay attention to ecological, sociocultural, economic, and political processes. And working with people, next slide, please, to try to address the problems that we are facing using agroecological principles, which are really important to us. And one of the advantages of using agroecological principles is that you can use them across contexts. So it is possible to co-learn from different processes that might be in very different situations and regions. Next slide, please. And one very important piece of the transformative agroecology that we use is transdisciplinarity, which is the respect, the valuing of diverse knowledge systems. You can see in this graph out of a recent paper that I co-authored with many other colleagues, and it was an effort with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food on the politics of knowledge, but really looking closely at what are the different types of knowledge and evidence that we need to use in order to shift our food systems to ones that are more sustainable, and paying a lot of attention to the knowledge that farmers already have, traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, in different ways of knowing, which really forces us to step out of our box. As a scientist, as someone trained in the academy, it really it challenges me to take into account factors like cosmovision, worldviews, and thinking about how am I going to have a dialogue with people, usually farmers, in order to just take advantage of the richness of this knowledge to deal with the challenges that we are facing. Next, please. And Mark mentioned participatory approaches. So I have been using participatory action research for a really long time. And this is one of the motivations of my work, is in simple words, just to do research with people, for people. And the notion that when I'm going to start a research process to support communities in whatever issues that they're facing, I'm going to try to get everyone involved from the beginning, developing research questions together, incorporating reflection in order to make decisions, and also trying to bring people into the research process itself, because that's where we're going to learn from that diverse knowledge that researchers like me are bringing, but also that the farmers themselves and community members. And also, as part of the process, start considering what actions can be taken using the information that we're generating in the process. Next, please. So agroforestry, to me, is a practice and an agroecosystem, we could say, that really fits with a lot of the regions in the tropics of the world. I'm going to talk today, and I think Luisa too is going to talk today about coffee. Those are the systems that I've been working with for a very long time now with smallholders. And in this figure, you can see, and thank you to Grow Ahead for developing it, because I've searched long and hard for a good figure, and I really like this one, that really shows the advantages of a shaded coffee system in terms of not only products, but also like how is it affecting some of the issues around climate change adaptation and mitigation, and also biodiversity conservation. So we see places where carbon can be conserved. We see the effect on microclimate that supports the coffee crop and other crops that might be part of the plantation. But I also like the fact that we see a household, and we also see other crops that are more oriented towards food, in the mention of food and income security. Because I think that when we're talking about commodities like coffee, we can't just focus on that commodity. If we really want to build this resilience, we have to think also about food. We also have to think about income that is coming from other sources. Next slide, please. And we also have to think about the entirety of the coffee value chain. This is my own visual diagram of the coffee value chain, from farm to crop, from the farmers to the consumers drinking in coffee shops, a lot of them in the global north, and also in supermarkets. And next slide, please. In each of these stages, climate change is going to have an impact. But when you look at the red text over there, most of the impact is really happening on farm. It's affecting the entire chain, and I just mentioned some of these things here, focusing more on the farmers. But the reality is that the increase of food insecurity, the increase of lower yields, the results of this in the form of migration, price instability, really has the biggest impact on the farmers. So I think the coffee industries, and I work mostly with the specialty coffee industry, is realizing that we really need to invest and to pay attention to how to support farmers to really maintain the supply that is the most important piece of this entire coffee value chain. Next, please. I also wanted to share with you, this is not very current, but I think that the data still holds in this day and age. I did a study with Lutheran World Relief between 2014 and 16, looking at climate change resilience with smallholder coffee farmers in 3 countries, in Honduras, in Nicaragua, and Haiti. And I did all of the Honduran interviews, talking to farmers, cooperatives about what were they feeling were the main effects from climate change on their farms. And you can see that we teased out the 3 main ones. There were others, but in all 3 countries, people mentioned drought, roya, which is the coffee leaf rust, and food insecurity. There's a couple of things that are interesting here. Although these 3 were present in all 3 countries, the intensity as to which farmers reported them is a little bit different. So in Haiti, for example, there was not a lot of reporting about the roya. It wasn't so serious there, but the other 2 were really high. And in Honduras, I remember drought was a major one. This was the first time that I've heard farmers concerned about drought in coffee plantations. Because usually there's no irrigation, it's usually rain-fed. And I think right now, from what I hear in the coffee communities that we still work in, these are still very prevalent climate-related challenges that farmers are facing. Next, please. So when thinking about that at the farm level, and this is mostly at the management of the agroecosystem itself, some of the practices that I consider agroecological practices, but are also considered by others as soil conservation or sustainable agriculture practices. These are not anything new. We've been talking about these for a very long time. And I just wanted to mention this because sometimes I think that we can get caught up trying to figure out new practices, when really I think what's happening is that there's not enough support, in this case in coffee, from the rest of the value chain to really get these practices into place at scale. Next, please. So I will share briefly one of the studies that we've done in the recent years with 2 cooperatives in Nicaragua and Mexico. And the focus of these studies was diversification. You can see all of the partners there. We had university partners in Mexico and Nicaragua. We had cooperative partners, NGO from the United States, Santa Clara University, and they work mostly in Nicaragua. We did the work in Mexico, so that's what I'm going to present today. Next, please. So the objective of the project was to analyze how diversification might be affecting smallholder farmers, specifically on food security, climate change resilience, and gender equity. And going back to those agroecology principles that I mentioned earlier, really quickly, the principles that we were thinking were going to get affected by applying diversification was biodiversity, synergy, economic diversification, co-creation of knowledge, social values, and diets. We've been publishing a lot out of this process. And actually right now, one of our graduate students, Andrew Gerlich, is doing a lot of work on soil health, which was a beyond the project, but still within the participatory action research process. So more and more is coming out. Next, please. And so I'll talk about SESMACH, which is a coffee cooperative in Chiapas near the national park called El Triunfo Biosphere Reserve. Next, please. The first thing that I will say is that in the PAR processes that we've done, we've been always trying to get the youth of the cooperatives involved. You can see this is the research team, the main research team, with 2 people from our institute, from our group, and then young farmers and a coordinator from the cooperative. And this is what this was sort of like they're saying that nobody knows everything, we all know something, that I really love. Next, please. One really important piece to support the PAR process is these exchanges of knowledge. Here we see an exchange where we brought people from Nicaragua to Mexico just to share at all levels, visiting communities, staying there for a couple of nights, sharing some of the plants and food that people have. The Nicaraguans brought pictures because they couldn't bring the fruits or anything like that. These are some of the richest ways to have people learn from each other. And that should be part of a lot of our projects. And one of the results from the participatory process was this calendar, which basically came from the farmers themselves saying, well, if we're going to really explore diversification, we need to see when the labor and the needs for each one of those crops is going to be. You can see here the different activities for corn, coffee, and honey, which is used as a decision tool for each family to really think if they're going to be able to add something else to what they're already doing, to be sure that they have the necessary resources at particular times of the year to do it. Next, please. And the last thing that I'll say is about this case study is that we were able to get diversification into the cooperative strategic plan. And it was really important to get the cooperative on board about not thinking just about coffee, even though that's the main important crop, to think about food security and also to invest in diversifying the farms of their members. Next, please. And finally, I'm not going to read all this. I'm going to let you sit on it for 30 seconds. That we really need to look at some of these initiatives and proposals across the value chain. So if we're going to do a project that maybe starts at the farm level with researchers using participatory action research, how can we connect with the buyers and the roasters? How can we connect with other development actors? And how do we keep actions with farmers and in farming communities as part of those conversations? And I think with that, I am going to just thank you for your attention, and I'll pass it on to Mark.
Great, thank you so much, Ernesto. I think we should sit on that last slide a little bit on the terms of the actions. We'll come back to that during the questions and answers, but I think that was a really nice look at, how do we learn, listen from the communities and engage them in through the sort of participatory action. I'd like to turn it over now to Luisa to share about the AEI, please.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Ernesto. Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Guatemalans and Honduras case study. Guatemala particularly has the Green Business Belt. We're going to talk about it a little bit ahead. Next slide, please. Well, I know that there is people that are not from Guatemala or Honduras, so I just wanted to place this map of what we are seeing or what we are experiencing in Guatemala. These maps were created by the Environmental Ministry and Rainforest Alliance, trying to understand adaptation. So we can see in the first map the exposure that Guatemalan is exposed to, and we're gonna see that we have a high exposure in terms of drought, heat waves, rain extremes, cold fronts, landslide, forest fires, floods, and frost. And then they also developed the sensibility index, and this is kind of like a nice evaluation because it's kind of positive, right? So we see that the places that we are working on, that it's Coban, Alta Verapaz, and Izabal, has high sensitivity. And they constructed this map with water supply and the performance of some of the main crops like beans and corn. So this is like a positive scenario. But then we have the capacity, the adaptation capacity for the departments of Guatemala, and we can see that the ones that we're working on are in red and orange. That means that the capacity is low and extreme low. So just so you can get a context on what we're dealing here in Guatemala. Next slide, please. And next, just to talk briefly about the Green Business Belt model in Guatemala, this is the emblematic program that we're working on, and the project that I am implementing right now, it's under this program. So just to talk a little bit, it has three main components. The first one focuses on the small farmers productions, assisting nurseries and providing technical assistance to provide agroforestry system and so on. Then the second component for this program is related to how to increase the organization in the communities, working to assist them with financial capacities, and so they are able like to access to better markets in the component number 3. So the number 2 focuses on how to provide the capacities for the small farmers to organize and to work with financial aids and and how to work, how to manage their crops. And the third one focuses on how we can help them enter these new markets, local and international markets. So those are the main 3 components for this program, and the project that I'm working on is under this program. Next slide, please. And well, as I said before, the name of the project is Building Climate Resilience through Value Chains for the Mobilization of Adaptation Funding. The main objective for this project, it's developing the Adaptation Equivalency Index in 4 value chains. This is for allspice, cardamom, and cocoa in Guatemala, and cocoa and coffee for Honduras. So in order for creating this index, we had 3 different focuses. The main part of this was doing like the research to an community level. So we constructed like a baseline, around 48 communities participating in this baseline. You can see in the map the areas in Guatemala where we work on, and the areas in Honduras in red where we work on. So with this baseline, we wanted to focus on finding socioeconomic information, environmental information, adaptation practices, climate change knowledge, and the status of the value chain of each community. So in this first stage, we engage with the communities through our staff. We have a small staff, but through the staff and through some consultants, we were able to use different tools like surveys, focal groups, and parcel visits to understand the socioeconomic information, the environmental data, the adaptation practices that they were actually working on, the knowledge that they have regarding climate change, and the status around the value change that we were working on. So while we were doing this, we were also recollecting the data, so we were able to construct the index later on. So next slide, please. So once we were able to use all these tools and get to know the communities, we also had some pilot projects to develop with these communities. We're working in total with around 20 communities within Guatemala and Honduras with different kind of projects. The result of these pilot projects had to do with what we find in these communities. So the key findings that we found is that droughts is a big issue in Guatemala and Honduras in these communities, and this is affecting their crops, cardamom, cocoa, and allspice crops, and also coffee. Another thing is that they are also wondering how can they diverse the income, because they were only depending on cardamom, on cocoa, and they need to diverse their income so they are able to have better quality of life. No, another thing that we found is that there was no they needed like more knowledge and technical management of the agroforestry system, because they some of them have the agroforestry system, but they are not managing the shades or managing, like Ernesto was telling us, the how do you say, the uh, well, when you cover the soil so it gets not too dry. Sorry, I forgot the word. And another issue that we found was water management, and another was gender participation and the government assistance. We were not able to find that the communities that we were working on had actually government technical assistance. And the other one was financial access. So these were like the key findings that we find through our researches with the consultants using the tools and everything. This was what we find. And through this, we decided to work with 10 communities and work together to implement these 10 or 20 pilot projects that had to do with the key findings that we were able to attend as well. So we also had the free and informed prior consultation with each community to confirm that they were able to work with us and they were interested in getting our technical support. So it was a really nice way of entering and working with the communities. So meanwhile, we were developing these 10 or 20 projects. We were developing the index. Can we get to the next slide, please? So to develop the index, we construct a tool that was able to capture different information from farmer, from expert, from the private sector, from the public sector, and from the academy. So we wanted to create a tool that was able to assess the vulnerability and adaptation to climate change in this value chain. We understand that every system this was actually a challenge, because we know that different systems have different adaptive capacities to climate change. So it was really hard to get to just one tool that could enable all these value chains and Guatemala and Honduras. So after we constructed the tool, we evaluated the effectiveness and the capacity of implementation of different adaptation practices. And this is a tool that recovers, it's constructed around 30 questions that the different sectors can answer. So next slide, please. So we had these participatory workshops to create this tool. So this was a really interesting approach as well, because we were working with national governments, environmental ministers, agriculture ministers from Guatemala and Honduras. And you can see here some of the logos of the organizations that work through these workshops. So we work in every level, right? And during this workshop, there was some interesting things. They were asking like, okay, we can have this tool, but we want to hear what the communities are saying about this. And so we applied this tool into the communities to see how they were perceiving the climate change and the adaptation in their value chains. So next slide, please. So we have this community. These are the preliminary community results. And when we talk about cacao, you can see that the indicators that we were able to study was water management, use of resilient varieties, diversification for adaptation, processing, and marketing. And you can see that when we enter all the information, the main issue in cacao and cardamom is in water management. So this let us know that in the first approach that we have with the communities, the main issue was water. What do we do with water? So the index was letting us know that that's really a main issue. And you can see that in cardamom, other than water management, the use of resilient varieties and processing are really low in adaptation. Well, in cardamom, there have not been studies like in coffee or cocoa about improved genetic materials to adapt to the climate change. And with processing, you know that cardamom is dried through the use of wood, of forest. So this has been a really issue for the cardamom sector, trying to adapt new technologies to reduce the impact of using the wood. And in allspice, you can see that the communities are telling us that they are in a middle level in adaptation. They are this is actually a new crop, so that may be the reason of the results that we are receiving. So just to talk a little bit more about the project, we have been developing this through a year, through different workshops taking place in Guatemala and in Honduras at different levels, local, national, and community level. So this has been a really well-received tool for Guatemala and Honduras, because you know that there is a lot of efforts trying to adapt and finding ways to measure adaptation. And going back to the pilot projects, we are having this. We are still working with the communities, providing technical assistance with each of the pilot projects that we are implementing. Next slide, please. So just to talk a little bit about lessons learned, well, it is important to improve resilience through collaborative and focused action. It is important to increase training and collaboration among actors of all levels. What we have learned during the process of the construction of the index is that we need to know what every actor is doing, since government institutions, other organizations working with the same value chains. It is important to get to know what they are doing, so we cannot have a duplicity in activities, but actually work with them. And then these results should be seen as a starting point for a process of continuous improvement, and not as the end in themselves. You know, adaptation is not a steady point. Adaptation is a dynamic process. So the adaptation that we're seeing today is not the adaptation that the communities may need tomorrow. So it's just a starting point, and it's important to keep on working and getting to know the needs of the community, including them in these studies. So I think that's basically my presentation. Thank you. I don't know if I have a little bit more of time, but thank you, Mark.
Well, thank you both, and thank you, Luisa, for that quick summary of a big, complicated project, knowing all the dimensions of implementing it across the different countries, both of you, multiple countries, and lessons learned, which I think is one of the strengths there. What I really appreciated also is Ernesto was looking at, your study was really focused on, communities and going deep within specific communities and understanding those dynamics. And Luisa, you were sort of looking at how do we understand from a broader system across many communities to come up with an index that can be valued by different actors within the value chain, whether it's the buyers, whether it's the aggregators, to be able to understand the risks involved, to be able to bring in support in that way. So I think they really complement each other well. I'd like to ask the participants or the audience here to please send in your questions. We have some already. So you have a moment to do that. But I'd like to ask both of you a question. Both of your projects really are rooted very much in engaging the communities in generating, their knowledge and getting their input. I was curious from both of you, what were your challenges in terms of engaging the communities, and what recommendations would you have in terms of others who might be interested in working with communities as to those challenges in terms of gaining their trust, making sure they understand, what they're contributing, what's going to be used with that information, so that it's a fair, open system, but also they understand what they're getting into and can contribute meaningfully to your projects. I don't know who would like to start with that.
You want to go, Luisa, or you want me to go?
I can go. Sure. Thank you. Well, I think that one of the main challenges in Guatemala was the language. As you know, the communities that we're working are 10 out of 11 are Quechua speakers. So the first challenge was to find the right team that also was able to have a direct conversation with them. So with that, we hired a technical team that was local and managed the language. So that was like one thing that we were like making sure that we had someone to talk that understand and was able to communicate well with the communities. That was a challenge in Guatemala. Honduras, we only have one community and from indigenous background, Pech community, but they were able to communicate in Spanish. So that was one main challenge. The other one was like gaining the community's trust, because we didn't have like a lot of investment to do with them. So it was like the work of the technical staff that was able to actually connect with them and in getting them interested in working with us. So that was a lot of like communication and negotiation with the community. So they were able to let us in. Uh, One side in Guatemala, we have like the Green Business Belt that actually had some activities going on around these communities. So they actually knew Heifer. But for Honduras, there was no other project working in this area. So it was a process of visiting them and like starting getting to know their parcels and like letting them know, well, we can do that, we can do this. So to gain the trust for the community. And one other thing was the a challenge was finding moments where we can have women and men either together or like having the information collected from the men's point of view and from the woman's point of view. As you know, they have different schedules, so we had to do some work even some Saturdays. So we were able to get together with everyone or get a specific dates to have to be able to talk with men and women and not just with one specific group. I think that that will be most challenge. And one other thing that I remember is the communication, because in the communities that we're working, there is no internet or phone access. So it was really hard at the beginning, getting the contacts and getting to call them and just going to the community and organizing the meetings, right? Because it was really hard to get them on the phone and actually visiting them. So that those were the main issues from my side.
Great, that was very rich. Thank you. Ernesto?
Yeah, I would agree with Luisa. What I would say is it really is about trust and developing trust to be able to engage. But we also have to remember that most of these communities are in need. They are struggling with difficult social economic situations, and most of them would welcome some help. But they've also had bad experiences in the past of promised help that doesn't really help them that much. So to me, it's always good to try to do some homework and find out which organizations are already in the area, or if you're working with cooperatives, is there a second level cooperative or a federation that you can start talking to and getting through, to start from a position of coming with someone that people know, to start those conversations. And then the transparency of being able to say what everyone is getting out of a project. I think many times we are tempted to just say, you know, we're coming here to support you. Development projects like the ones Heifer does are different, but as an academic, when I'm doing research, I'm definitely getting something out of it, right? This is my work, and if I couldn't do this research, I wouldn't be as successful. So saying those things up front to level the playing field and the negotiation. So going with an openness to negotiate and for people to feel that they're just not given something, but they're being asked about co-constructing a project. Also, you know, being respectful of knowledges and norms is super important. And we all know these things. And I think that what happens is we go too fast, right? Like we got to get this done, and the funder told us to do it, X, Y, and Z. So one of the things that is really important to me, like I said in my last slide, is to how can we start bringing everybody on board, from the funder, from the coffee roaster. I'm going to keep talking about coffee, but this also applies to all of the commodities you were talking about, Luisa, to be able to support, even if it's not monetarily, but if a buyer tells a cooperative, you know, I think this project is really good for you all, and it's going to help us continue to buy your product, like this more like collective effort from all of the actors, I think makes a huge difference. And I experienced that when I worked here with Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. We were working with them, and we would come and do research, but in collaboration with the buyer, it was really great for the cooperative, right? And we also worked with Equal Exchange similarly, where like, how can we bring all of these actors from the chain to contribute in whichever way they can, but so the farmers know that it's not this isolated thing going on, you know, be it a Heifer project or a research project from the University of Vermont.
Great. Thank you for those comments. I think I'll go straight to some of the questions that are coming in, which are good. So one has to do with, in part, scaling what we do and your kinds of projects and I guess next steps. And so for both of you, what are the next steps with the projects, and how do you go from what you're currently doing to either other value chains or Ernesto, for you, you know, you had those projects, but like how does that start taking greater effect across the community? And in part, I guess the question is, how do projects have a life beyond the projects themselves? And so they're not just these tidy things where you've learned something, but it actually makes, you know, change on the ground happen.
Yeah, so I think all of us probably in this call are in conversations about transformation. We're talking a lot about food systems transformation. And I like that I've heard several people say, you know, transformation happens when there's a large quantity of change in different places of a system. So there's change at the farmer level, there's change at the buyer level, there's change in the international development actor level. And that collective change really leads to transformation, which hopefully will also be more long lasting, right? And so this goes back to what I was saying, like, how can we try to do things more collectively? And in order to scale is to keep in mind the formation of networks, but not networks that are just for connecting and exchanging information, which is really good and works for some things. But I'm in so many networks right now that I feel that some of those are not effective anymore for me. It's a challenge, right? But more networks that are focusing on co-learning and networks that are focusing on shared experience, where there's something tangible that you're talking about. And so, for example, the recent collaboration, Mark, you were in it with Heifer on a proposal, the idea of working with a large number of cooperatives that we're going to be connected and we're going to be doing the same thing, reflecting on what's being done, learning from each other. I think that's a really great way to scale, right? Because you're doing similar things together. And it's really complicated because each place is going to have different actors that you want to get involved. But I think that's what it really takes, rather than saying, you know, I have this particular method that I'm just going to replicate in all these different places in isolation. Rather, how can we do things so that the highest number of actors are participating and around a similar thing? So that's something that we're actually attempting to try. We're doing it by giving seed grants, but having a cohort model here at the University of Vermont. But we have an idea of doing this both nationally in the US and maybe internationally, where part of receiving some support in funds and in technical assistance, et cetera, is that you're going to participate in this community of practice, you could say. So everybody's deepening, and hopefully, you know, we got to try different things, right? But this is a model that has worked in a program that I've been working in, supported by the McKnight Foundation, where there's these long-standing communities of practice where people are constantly getting together to learn and going deeper than just, you know, a call here and there to exchange information and how are you. And I'll respond to something else in one of the questions about language. And, you know, obviously this is harder to do if the 10 different partners all over the place are using different language. And it's also a lot more difficult to do when you're trying to advocate and push for policy change. You know, if Heifer's using, you know, climate smart and I'm using agroecology and somebody else is using regenerative ag, it's going to be hard for us to have a common message. And sometimes it's more that than being dogmatic about using one term or another. It's just thinking about, that's a very easy way for somebody against you to say, you don't even know like what you guys are talking about. You're using different words. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Luisa, do you want to share? And there, we could add, there's a couple points in the questions that I think touch the idea of scaling is, you know, are governments and decision makers around climate policy interested in this index? That seems very relevant to that. And are you thinking about other sectors? You know, is this something that's only good for cardamom, or is this something that you think could be applied to other, you know, commodities or other food systems?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Yeah, well, in terms of scaling the index, we are actually creating an application so it's easier to be used. And the governments are interested in having this tool in their system. They are, well, with Guatemala, we have been engaging really well so they can have this yeah, as part of their national climate change system information. So we are really close with them working to get this tool to be work at a national level. And in regards of other areas of using this methodology, we are working with the National Forest Institute, INAF, in Guatemala, and they have a student with studying in the university, creating or using this methodology in the forest sector. So the methodology has been really gain popularity within the policymakers with the Forest National Forest Institute and with the national environmental ministers. So there is a lot of interest in of keep using this as a tool and scaling up. From Honduras, we have a little bit of more challenge to engage with the national government, but we are still in discussions with them to be able to use this tool at a national level and in other sectors. Honduras is interested in using it in cattle, because since Heifer has this program with cattle, so I think that will be the focus in Honduras. And just to add to what Ernesto was talking about scaling up and working together with the communities, we are working in different levels. Like I was telling you, the exchange of experience with different projects and with different communities, so they are able to see how the practices are working in these communities, so they are able to know that they are working and they can apply them in their actual communities. So that's really a nice work that we can do to scale up these actions. And yeah, I heard you're talking about agroecology. In Heifer, we talk about climate smart practices. I'm talking about adaptation practices. So I think it's really important that to know that maybe we're talking with different names, but at the end, we're talking about same actions. So that's a really interesting point of view. I think there was a question about that, right? Like Heifer focus on climate smart actions, and I think it depends also in the on the actor that you are talking to, because right now in Guatemala it's like adaptation practices and it's okay, we can call it that, but with communities we have to be clear that a climate smart practice can be an adaptation practices and it's also agroecology. So thank you.
I think, yeah, those points are really interesting, and it makes me think, part of it is the trust building and how long does it take to build trust. And I think often we have very short timelines to be able to do all the pre-work. And a common thread is, I think Ernesto, you were talking about that you have some, needs in terms of your profession and putting those on the table early on. And I think, what I've observed is that while there's commonality between regenerative agriculture, agroecology, climate smart agriculture, organic, holistic management, there are also some different emphases that are important, and it's important to put some of those on the table as well. So it's both recognizing that there's a lot of commonality, but there's some important differences as well, and how do we balance both those out? One of the questions that I think is really interesting, and both of you touched upon it, and it's certainly in my experience, and I'd love to get your insights as deep practitioners on this, is often projects and even institutions like to be reductionist. They want to be focused because it's very easy to be pulled in different directions outside of your focus. However, the reality on the ground is complex and requires multiple things to be brought in that sometimes are outside of what your focus area is. Ernesto, you talked about how working with the coffee cooperatives, diversification was something that they needed to be engaged with to include. So even though they're a coffee value chain, maybe diversification was critical to the communities they're working with. I know, Luisa, with the AI and certainly Guatemala, that water is something that sometimes falls outside of what we consider, doing. But for our program, it's clear that that's the most important priority if we want to support communities to do water, yet that falls outside of what, we had considered as part of what we do. And so I was wondering, and the question in the Q&A was, it's about, a value chain approach, which is more narrow versus a sort of community-based approach. So I'd love to hear from both of you, how do you balance that? How do you engage when you want to be focused for all of its advantages on a value chain or on a project, yet we need to consider other things as well? And how do you resolve that tension?
Luisa, you go first this time.
Okay. Well, that has been a challenge, because every time that we visit the communities, the main issue is it's always water. They always mention water. Mark, you were here and you heard a lot about the communities. I think 3 of the 4 communities that we visited talk about water. But I think it was really important. I know that when you are doing research and other stuff, you can maybe get a little bit out of the subject. But with this specific project, we had specific funding, and we were not able to address directly water management because of the money that we have to invest in the pilot projects, and because of the main focus of the value change that was this project. So what we did was focus on managing the expectations for the community, letting them know that even though we understood the problem and the needs that they have, we were not able to address them. But we were able to help them organize and get assistance from the municipality to see how they can manage and get assistance with water management issues. And another way was getting Mark there to listen to them, and he provided us some extra funding, so we were able to address some of the key issues. So that's also a good way, like getting to know what donors or what other persons are actually working on those needs, and address them to these communities so they are able to actually assist them. So that's two of the ways that we were able to manage the situation with water, that we were not able to assist them all.
We don't have a lot of time, but what I will add is, I think, and I'm seeing a change, after like 30 years working in this field, that there is an openness to embrace complexity more so than before, because for many years we tried to avoid complexity and say, no, we're going to do water because that's what we do. And if we try to do too much, then we're not going to do anything. And to me, the key is to pay attention to everything and be honest about what you can work on. So we've been using the principles of agroecology to work with different types of farmers and organizations. And I showed in my slides 13. So that's everything, right? So when you start working, you're not going to be able to work on everything. You have to prioritize, and a community might be most interested in water. You have to, through the process, you have to keep coming back that this water is also connected to all these other things. And this is where sometimes that short-term nature is hard, because at some point if you work on it enough, you might have an aha moment of, oh, now I see the connection. You see a connection between water and, I'll just say, co-creation of knowledge. And it's really important. And maybe there also comes with an opportunity for additional funding or technical support or what is not. But, being able to say that to funders, and I know that it's hard. I mean, I deal with funders all the time, but I am seeing some openings that people are realizing we have to really embrace complexity and to take it a step at a time without always paying attention to all the different factors that are coming together. So with your question about the value chain, Mark, is yes, we might be talking about coffee production and climate change adaptation practices, but we need to link them to the bigger value chain. And we need to link them to the roaster, to the buyer. And maybe for them, it's going to be like, I'm going to pay you a higher price so you can maintain your practice. How do I deal with that on my end? But if you don't have those conversations and you just ignore it, then you're never going to have a long-lasting solution. So that dialogue to me is really important.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we're at time. There are a few other questions that we haven't been able to get to. And certainly, you can reach out to me and our Heifer team and with these questions, and we will get back to you with some responses. There's some really interesting ones about participatory action research and about the AI and the programs. But I'd like to take a quick moment to thank our two presenters for a really rich conversation and sharing with us your expertise and insights and experiences. I think we've learned a lot about how to start working towards resilience and adaptation, specifically about thinking about developing an open dialogue with communities, learning, co-creating, and co-design of projects. Thank you both, and I hope you have a great day, and looking forward to continuing on the good work together.
Thank you so much, Mark and Heifer team and everyone for attending. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.